Hello, everybody. How are you today? We are back for another Bible story reading. It's a nice day. It's a Sunday afternoon, and it's been a couple of days since we did a Bible story reading, but we are back. We have been talking about the story of Daniel, and we are now in Daniel chapter 3. For those of you who might be joining one of these videos for the very first time, I'd like to welcome you. I'd like for you to be able to catch up maybe on some of the other teachings that we have done, the other stories that we have read. What we do is we go through the different stories in the Bible for people who have never heard the stories. Maybe you've never read them for yourself. You might only know bits and pieces based on what somebody has told you about them. Maybe you've heard a sermon, but the preacher only preached a little piece of it. You don't know the whole story. Maybe you've just never had the chance to hear these stories for yourself. So whatever the reason is, we go through these stories that are in the Bible because they are so rich with culture and history and knowledge about who God is for people who want to learn them. That way, if they come up in conversation, you have an opportunity to participate in that conversation intelligently. Sometimes conversations about the Bible can make people uncomfortable because they don't know what's in there. But now we take you through the stories so that you know what they say. We've been talking about the story of Daniel, and if you'll remember in the last chapter, the king that Daniel had basically been captured by, King Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream that was very disturbing to him, and he asked all of the magicians to interpret the dream for him without him telling them what the dream was. He expected them to come to him, be able to tell him what the dream was and what it meant. And none of them were able to. So King Nebuchadnezzar got upset, and he was going to have all of the wise men in the kingdom put to death. But Daniel said, "Let me pray on this first." And he prayed, and he asked God to give him wisdom, to reveal to him what the dream was. And God showed him what that dream was, and he went to Nebuchadnezzar and told him, "This is what your dream was, and this is what it means." So Nebuchadnezzar has now made Daniel very important. He set him up to be the leading manager in his kingdom, and the three guys that were with him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are now overseers of different areas. They manage different provinces in Babylon. And this takes us up to chapter 3. So let's go ahead and get started. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the province to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the province assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshipped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, May the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Then in a furious rage, King Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you, as king, to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary. And he commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace. So these men, in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes, were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied to the king. He exclaimed, Look, I see 4 men, not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their heads were singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump, for there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. That's the end of chapter 3. There are 3 ways that we look at these wonderful stories when we read them. Any stories that we read in the Bible, we are able to look at this way so that we can learn it. 1, what does it say? We have to have reading comprehension. We have to read the words on the page. If we don't read them, we don't know what they say. 2, what was it saying to the people of the time? What was going on? What's the history, the culture? We have to take everything into context. And 3, what, if anything, does it say to us today? This is a fantastic story. This is a story that so many people know. They at least know the generals of this story, that there were 3 guys thrown into a fiery furnace and God saved them. But let's unpack this very quickly. So what has happened? The king has had this golden statue built. And he has decided this, now remember, this statue is 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. This is not just a little statue sitting on a fireplace mantle somewhere, folks. This thing is huge. It is huge. And he set it up on the plain of Dura. In other words, it's out there. It's big for all of the people who come by to see. Everybody can see this thing. It's not some little thing that they have to go looking for. It is visible. And he says, whenever you hear music playing, the harps, the drums, when people are playing, bow down and worship this statue. Wherever you are, just bow down and start worshiping it. Well, there were some Chaldeans who were a little bit jealous of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's position within the community, because the king had set them up as he had appointed them to have positions of importance and power in the land. And they were managing these different areas. They would be like, city managers, if you will. And these people were a little jealous. So they went to the king and they said, hey, king, there's some Jews who are not worshiping this God. You set out this decree and said that anytime people heard the music, they had to bow down and start worshiping. But they're not doing it. So the king got upset and he said, well, bring me these men that you're talking about. So they bring him Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he says to them, now I told you that whenever you hear the music, you're supposed to bow down and worship my statue. Why aren't you doing it? They're like, sorry, dude. We don't worship anybody but our God. And he said, well, if you don't bow down when I play this music, then you're going to get thrown into a fire. And you think your God can save you from that? They said, yes, we do. We do believe that our God can save us from your powers and from the fiery furnace. But if he doesn't, he's still God, and we are still not worshiping your statue, no matter what. Well, that made the king so furious that he had the furnace turned up 7 times hotter than normal. So hot, in fact, he had them all tied up with their clothes on, all fully clothed, and he had them all bound and tied up. But the furnace was so hot that the guards that were taking them up to the furnace, when they opened the doors of the furnace to throw them in, just the heat from the furnace killed the guards. Meanwhile, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fall in, tied up. Well, the king's observing all of this, and he looks, and suddenly he sees 4 people. All of them are untied, their clothes are not singed, and they're walking around. They're just walking around like nothing ever happened to them. And the king says to the people around him, he says, wait a minute, didn't we throw 3 men in there? They said, yeah. He said, well, there's 4 in there now, and the 4th one looks like a son of the gods. So they get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the furnace, and their clothes are not singed. Their hair is not singed. They don't even smell like smoke. There's not anything on them that would indicate that they've just been thrown into all of these flames. Nothing. So the king says, now I know that your God is able to deliver you. And he rewards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And besides rewarding them, he makes a decree. He says, anybody who says anything bad about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb. What is this saying to us today? There are so many lessons that we can get from this story right here. Sometimes in this life, there is a lot of pressure in the world to not worship God, to not do things God's way. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that if you do things God's way, you will always be protected from worldly harm, because we know that that's not true. But what we do know is that God is all powerful. And when we take a stand, he will take care of us. Had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego perished in that fire, they knew that God was able. He was able to keep that from happening. But if God didn't, they knew that they would be okay with God. We go through things in this life sometimes that cause us to think that we would rather be safe and okay in this world with the worldly people around us, rather than safe and okay in the arms of an all-powerful God. I would encourage you today to really look at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and ask yourself, do I have the level of trust that these men had when they were being tossed into a fire simply because they refused to deny God? There may come a time when you are faced with some terrible decision of, am I going to deny God or am I going to stand up for God? And that would be a wonderful time then to remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Jesus says, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father who is in heaven. So we are taught here not to deny God, to be brave and to be courageous, and God will always consider us and look out for us. Well, that's the story from Daniel chapter 3. I hope you learned something today. I hope you got something out of it. I look forward to us being together next time so we can continue reading all about the stories that come out of Daniel. I hope you have a great day. God bless you.